Hello, welcome back to Up the Cinema podcast, and in this episode, we're going to be taking a stab at Giallos, which is a little joke I made, which I hope is funny to other people.
I think it's funny.
Yeah, we're just going to be talking about different Giallo movies.
Yeah, and to kind of start off on this episode, kind of describing what a Giallo is, it's primarily an Italian cinema genre, which kind of mixes murder mystery, slasher, thriller, and even, in some cases, some psychological or supernatural elements.
Yeah, and they do mostly stem from Italy. It's kind of like film noir, where some people don't think it's film noir if it's not an American movie from the 40s and 50s.
Right.
A Giallo is not a Giallo unless it's an Italian movie from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. And I mean, the Giallos were still created, in the 80s and 90s, but those kind of peak years where this really started taking off and had commercial success was primarily in the 60s and 70s, where it kind of peaked, I'd say, in like the mid to late 70s of just, really interesting, really well made, well produced, well done movies. So,
and Giallo itself, the name doesn't mean much. Giallo means yellow in Italian, and it was the color of like the cheap paperback mystery thrillers that were being sold in like the late 20s. So it just stems from that. The color yellow was associated with the thriller genre in Italy. So that's all it means. But
yeah, and I speaking of the kind of the yellow paperbacks of these murder mystery books, I read that a lot of Giallos were kind of a stab, as you would say, at creating some of those murder mysteries that were kind of classics. A lot of inspiration comes from like Agatha Christie novels or like Edgar Allan Poe poems and stuff like that. So,
and visually they set themselves apart with the gore, which if you watch a Giallo, you would know all the red blood that gushes out of the wounds. That's really red and vivid.
Yeah.
All the sets are always really pretty and like outlandish type sets. It's always like a big castle or something like that. It's always like really pretty. And then there's always a killer that hides his identity and a detective that's on his tail. So there's elements that connect them all.
Yeah, there are elements, and I think that you kind of picked 3 movies to kind of talk about in terms of kind of Giallo history.
Yeah, I was in charge of the programming.
Yes.
For this, and I picked Blood and Black Lace, which I think is what started it. It might not be technically classified as the first Giallo, but it's the first Giallo that really brought attention to this as a genre.
It came out in 1964, and it was directed by Mario Bava, which I believe he did some other Giallos.
Did a lot of Giallo and did other horror movies that were also important that weren't Giallos. And I think he's one of the important directors to talk about here.
Yeah.
And Blood and Black Lace, to me, it's still the Giallo. I think it's the one I think of. I know a lot of people think of the next one we're going to be talking about, but I think of Blood and Black Lace. Maybe because it's the first big one, but also I think it's one of the best ones still.
Yeah, I agree. I like the setting that it
The fashion house.
Yeah, it's at a fashion house, and all the models are kind of being killed off one by one. And there's elements of truly it is like a murder mystery thing with just a lot more gore. But I'd say this one isn't really that gory in terms of.
I think it's very violent.
It's violent, but I wouldn't say it's gory. I'd say it's still pretty violent, but I don't know. It didn't like make me clutch my pearls as some of the other ones did.
I think a lot of the element that they made it feel like a murder mystery to you is the intro titles of them just showing the women individually.
Yeah.
With like bright mannequins and bright colors behind them, just really setting that these are all gonna die. Especially because the Italian title is 6 Women for the Killer. Which kind of spoils it when you see 6 women being introduced.
Yeah. You kind of realize that they're pretty much all gonna die.
Which is normal for Giallo. I mean, pretty much everyone you're gonna see is gonna die. It's normal for Giallos, it's normal for slashers.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this one, it feels very 60s, I'd say. But I still think it's very fresh. There's one that we're going to talk about, I think, soon, that I feel like it's not as fresh. It feels kind of a little dated. Mm-hmm. But this one doesn't really feel all that dated. It just kind of feels like it's taking place at the time in which, the 60s, but it doesn't feel like, oh, this is an old movie. You know what I mean?
Right. It could be just a modern reinterpretation of the 60s.
Yeah.
I think it's the color. It's the use of color. The colors are so bright. I think a lot of people comment on that when they see this movie for the first time, is that the colors are so unique to this movie, the way it shows color. Yeah. But I think it kind of is its legacy, that the color helps with it feeling not old, because when you think of old movies, you think of black and white. Just, if I say old movie, first thing is black and white. The colors are so bright that it makes it feel less old.
Yeah. And I feel like this movie was just really enjoyable just to watch. I think that it has a good... I mean, the plot line is a little bit not unique in any way. But I think it was probably one of the first ones to kind of do it, where you have this person that has a lot of dirt on everyone involved. Right. It's not like a big plot point, but it is kind of there to kind of further the momentum of the story. So the first girl that dies, they find her diary, and everybody has a reason to not want that diary.
Right, that's the moving force of why more murders keep happening.
Yeah. Because
more secrets have to be hidden, and it drives the movie forward. And I think the movie's more about the kills, honestly, at least to me. So that this simple plot that moves it forward is kind of nice, because it keeps the kills coming at a steady pace. Yeah,
it is a steady pace where, like, every couple of segments, I guess, there is a new murder, there is a new way to be murdered.
They get imaginative with the kills.
Yeah, a little bit. Some of them are basic. They just get stabbed, right, or whatever. Lame. That's like the textbook, slasher. Is they get stabbed or they get slashed or whatever. But this immediately kind of reminded me, just in terms of vibes, Last Night in Soho, the 2021 Edgar Wright movie, which we've kind of talked about privately. I don't think we've ever discussed it.
We've mentioned it, I think. I mean, a lot of podcasts and movie reviewers mention it. It was kind of divisive at the time, and it's divisive in this podcast.
Yeah, because I really enjoy it,
and I don't.
I think it could be done better, but I really like the vibes, and that's all that matters to me. But this kind of reminded me of it a little bit.
It's the fashion house. But it just
kind of like it's the fashion house, but it just kind of made me very firmly believe that Last Night in Soho is not a Giallo. It's not, I think, maybe sure it could be influenced by Giallos, which I think I'll kind of talk a little bit more about later too, but like it's still just I think it's just a thriller in my opinion, but it's still good. But this kind of reminded me of it, and I can kind of see where Edgar Wright kind of got his influences, especially when the main character in Last Night in Soho kind of has this romanticized version of the 1960s. And this took place in the 1960s.
Right. And it is like these romanticized women. They're all models.
Yeah.
And they're all... The police kind of thinks it's a sexual killing because they're only killing pretty women or desirable women, whatever term they use.
Yeah.
So... it does kind of give that off, the glamour of being murdered in the 60s.
Yeah. There is a lot of glamour to it.
Be murdered in the 60s.
Yeah.
Magical.
But I think my issue with it, and why I didn't rate it higher, because I'll go ahead and give my rating. I gave this a 6 out of 10. Was just the fact that I feel unfulfilled at the end. Like, I don't really think that there's a massive payoff. Because everyone, like, the payoff is everyone dies. Yeah. Like, literally everyone
including
dies.
Including
the killer.
Well, the killer always dies, but...
it's like the killer and the accomplice, and then all of the girls at the workhouse, or at the fashion house.
It's just... I don't think the twist, so to say, is great of who the killer is. Because it's kind of like, oh, it's this guy. Okay. It's not like it's a huge payoff as who the killer is.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The movie itself is just... I really like the pacing. The scores in all of the Giallos are always so unique and jazzy and make you move in your seat.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I like the kills in this. It just really works. And it was a failure at the time, financially and popularly. Like, not a lot of people were watching this when it came out. But it kind of stood past all the movies that beat it at the time at the box office. And now it's like the first Giallo, or the first recognizable Giallo.
Yeah, I think you were talking about it when we were watching that there was Giallos before this, but they weren't labeled as Giallos until this movie kind of set it apart.
Even Bava himself directed a movie before this, a couple of years before this, that you could consider a Giallo, but this is the one that kind of made it a genre. So, I mean, but that's me looking back. Maybe at the time people had different opinions, or maybe this is not even the starting point for some people because it wasn't successful.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't well received by critics, or people weren't watching it in general, so maybe people have different opinions on it, but to me this is the Giallo, like the first one.
Yeah.
The one that started the craze, which it was a craze, because once they started rolling out, by the time we get to the next one, there was a lot of Giallos coming out.
Yeah.
And directors were putting 2 or 3 out in the same year.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. It's kind of, but it is kind of like pulpy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that would be kind of the definition. It's very stylistic. It's very, kind of reminds me of the kind of slasher craze we saw in like the early 2000s and the late 90s, where you had like all the Scream movies.
Yeah, I think part of that was also the digital cameras being accessible to people. So now a lot of people can make cheap movies and if you're going to make a cheap movie, what's easier than grabbing a bottle of ketchup and killing someone? Because you got knives at home. You got all the things you need.
Yeah, for real.
So now you have a cheap camera, and that helps. But
did you give your rating for this movie?
Oh, I give it an 8. I think it's the killer's look is super cool. Even though then once they reveal who the killer is, it's kind of like, oh, it's this guy, okay, whatever. But up to then, it's like a mystery, and it's a really well put together mystery. And I like the look. I like the mask, the blank face. It's creepy. Like seeing someone with no face stabbing at you is creepy.
Yeah, he's got like a top hat and a trench coat, which is the trench coat is kind of
everyone has
like that's kind of part of the Giallo look. And yeah, I think there is like some gratuitous scenes of violence and stuff, like some of the kills in this one.
It's gotta be. That's what I'm here for. That's because these movies were made to make money.
Yeah,
they weren't particularly made for the art of it, right? It's a murder movie, so they're gonna show you the blood and they're gonna show you the knife going in.
Yeah,
and this had really cool kills. It had really cool shots, really cool colors, really cool music. I mean, it's just a movie that's really cool. Yeah. Maybe the artistry, like people are going to be, it's not written deeply enough. The characters don't have depth, which is fine. They don't.
Yeah,
but they're there to be killed, and that's fine too.
Yeah, I guess that might be some of my problem with the genre in itself. It's that it's not very like deep.
It's not deep.
Like the storytelling isn't crazy. But I will say that the kill in here that made me the most uncomfortable was the one where the killer puts the girl's face to a furnace and just burns her face until she's, yeah,
and it's even worse if you think about it, because the furnace is in a cave behind the fake wall he has.
Yeah,
so that's just another layer of why the kill sucks.
Yeah,
because even if you scream, no one's gonna hear you.
Exactly. So that was the only one that really like made me like a little scared. I don't know.
I like the kill where the girl that has her face burned off, her corpse falls onto another girl, and then the killer smothers her with a pillow cushion. It's usually with just a regular pillow that you get smothered with, but with a pillow cushion, you got no way out because it's so big, it covers your whole face.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like you're suffocating and there's no way out. And then you also have your friend's corpse on top of you.
Yeah, that's like really awful. Just all of this would be really an awful way to go. But yeah, I think we're pretty much done with that movie. And
yeah.
That kind of brings us to the next movie that we have. We jump about almost 10 years in the future to Torso.
Torso by Sergio Martino.
Yes.
And I picked this not because it's my favorite. It's actually my least favorite we're talking about today.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
agree.
even my favorite Sergio Martino movie. I love All the Colors of the Dark, and that's my favorite Giallo period. Mm-hmm. But Torso is like a Giallo that does all the Giallo things.
Yeah.
So I think we had to talk about the most Giallo, in my opinion.
Yeah. It definitely...
It's psychosexual
yes,
killer,
yes.
which is like a theme that is very reoccurring because it's cheap and you can show girls' boobs easily and like...
And there is a final girl in this.
Yeah, there's a final girl.
Where I think the other ones that we talk about don't... Either they don't focus on one girl in particular or everyone dies. So this one does have a final girl where the final girl does make it out alive.
It also has where the final girl's not the main character for half of the movie because the main character gets killed over and over again.
Yeah.
So the woman it gets focused on gets killed and then there's another woman.
Yeah.
Until you get the final girl. And I don't know, it's just such a... He has a motorcycle mask sometimes when he kills. He mutilates the bodies. He does it because of his sexual issues from childhood.
Yeah.
So it's so like classic in the themes that it portrays that I think Torso is like one of the Giallos that if this is your first one, if this is your first Giallo that you watch, you'll get a sense of what the other ones have to offer.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people consider this to be the first ever slasher film as well.
Yeah.
Like, on top of being a Giallo, it kind of ushered in the idea of a slasher film because, you know, the way that everyone gets killed and the final girl element and the psychosexualness of it. And, you know, I think that this probably brought on a new wave of horror.
Yeah, and this is also one where you legitimately will question who the killer is. Because there's so many men that could be the killer.
Yeah, because they're all kind of creepy.
And they all have the little scarf that the Italian men have at the time, I guess.
Yeah, that was like a big thing where you know that the killer has the scarf, but it's so popular. And the scarf merchant, I guess, is killed, so he can't talk about, like...
Yeah, it's another one of those killing the people
to.
that are just loose ends. They could have information that they don't want other people to have, so they get killed.
Yeah, they're kind of like not really... They didn't necessarily need to be killed.
God, it was so creepy though. He didn't need to be killed.
He was creepy. I did not like his character.
And this has, again, the element of a lot of beautiful women with a lot of boobs out. This is actually the one that's more gratuitous with his nudity.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
really gratuitous.
Yeah, and they have like the two characters that are... I mean, the Wikipedia page calls them lipstick lesbians, so...
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They're the ones that are kind of, like, into each other.
Yeah, they kind of kiss in bed, and then they get killed together.
Yeah. And because the killer, you know...
Has all the sexual...
is sexually stunted and whatnot, so... They do get killed because of that, you know?
Yeah, it's... the more I talk about it, it's such a cheap movie.
It really is.
But in kind of
sleazy.
a wonderful way, though. It's kind of like the magic of the 70s. It's like you can make this sleazy movie and it's still like a significant movie for a significant subgenre.
Right.
But it's so sleazy. And I guess that was to sell tickets. Here's gore, here's boobs. Come watch it.
It's a mystery.
Yeah, in the 70s, what are you going to do? Read a book or go watch the hot girls getting stabbed in the chest?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, you know... interesting.
It also goes with the world of drugs, which Blood and Black Lace did. We didn't talk about it. I think people give more importance to that than it has. But this is the world of drugs just to show the societal kids at the time, like the liberated youth at the time, and those are the ones that get killed. Yeah.
And, you know, this movie got pretty popular, I'd say, in the U.S. Through the drive-in grindhouse circuits.
It's a perfect grindhouse movie.
Yeah, where I think that this was played alongside the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 1974 version. So you got two kind of very slashery, sleazy kind of films, I guess.
Right.
And, you know, that kind of made it, I wouldn't say mainstream, because I can guarantee you that if I ask any one of my friends that don't really watch movies, they would know what this is at all.
I don't think Torso is a recognizable title outside of either A, people that are into horror, B, people that are into giallos and Italian movies in general at the time in the 70s. which I am, and then C, maybe people that collect boutique Blu-rays like Arrow. Arrow puts a lot of Giallos out, and Torso has its own release, and it's also in the Giallo Essentials, which is a popular box set that they have. I have it.
Yeah.
The yellow one.
And I'm pretty sure that both Quentin Tarantino and Eli Roth have cited this movie as being big inspirations for their respective films of Grindhouse and Hostel Part 2. So, you know, I think in terms of filmmaking scenes, this movie is really important.
Right.
I personally did not enjoy this one, and this was the first Giallo that I ever saw, because back to Last Night in Soho, I did enjoy that. I thought, like, you know, it was an interesting concept to me. I don't think it's a great movie. I just liked it for the vibes and, you know, the overall, like, oh, good for her type thing, you know? And you were like, oh, well, if you liked this, maybe you'll like Giallos, because this is just a shitty Giallo.
It is a shitty Giallo.
And so I was like, okay, maybe, sure, we can try it. And then this was the first Giallo that I saw, like, ever. This is the very first one. Wasn't a fan.
Right. I think it's too brutal and too cheap and sleazy and in your face.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a good example of what... Because, like, we're talking about Blood and Black Lace, and after this we're talking about Deep Red. Those are not the average Giallo. They're really not. The average Giallo is a cheap stab-em-all type movie where all the women die. That's what the average one is.
Yeah, but I think that what I liked about Last Night in Soho are not the elements of the of the stereotypical Giallo, which I don't particularly enjoy films that are sleazy or...
No, we don't cover sleazy movies, really. This is the sleaziest movie we have ever covered. Yeah. And there's no, you know, there's only top nudity. There's no bush or anything, so... Right. Well, there might be some bush, but...
I don't remember at this point, but like...
I think actually the opening scene is someone covering their bush.
Yeah, I think
with like
so.
a doll.
Well, because the opening scene is like a threesome. Right. And we don't know the significance of that until later, because that's kind of why the killer kills, because he's being... A lot of blackmail happens in a lot of Giallos, I'd say, too. That's what happens in Blood and Black Lace as well, is the first girl to die was blackmailing...
everyone.
Yeah, not everyone, but she was blackmailing the killer, so, you know, like...
And a couple other people. Not everyone.
Not everyone, but, you know, she had dirt on everybody, but, you know, this one was also blackmail. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a pretty big element in a lot of Giallos, too, but, I mean, kind of back to my original point, like, I think that the elements of Giallos, I don't particularly... love them. So I think that as a genre, it's not my favorite. I think it's okay. I gave this one a 6 out of 10 as well.
I gave it a 7. It's not my favorite, but I think it's really fun to me, to be honest. It's like a fun kind of background movie. It's not deep. I don't think you can really get a lot out of it if you're trying to, you know, look past the surface.
No, I think it is purely aesthetics in a lot of ways.
It's aesthetics and fun. It's fun. It's just that someone gets stabbed. It's fun. I mean, that's what horror fans want. And this is the most horror of them all, I would say. Of the ones we're covering, at least.
Yes, I would agree. It's less of a thriller and more of a horror because, you know...
And its significance to slashers.
There is like a detective character, but it's not really... his story, I guess.
It's the story of the victims.
Yeah, and it follows the final girl, and she's the one that kind of saves herself in some ways.
Because in Deep Red, it's not the story of the victims at all. It's the story of the man investigating the victims and investigating who killed them.
Yes. So yeah. So we'll move on to Deep Red, which came out in 1975. So just a few years after. Torso. And
this is, I mean, it's Dario Argento.
Yes,
of course.
Dario Argento.
It's the biggest name in Italian horror. It's the biggest name in Giallos. And Deep Red is number 1 in every list of Giallos.
Yeah, it's a big inspiration for a lot of movies,
and it's like, what do you think of when you think of Giallo's first movie is Deep Red? For, like, basically everyone.
Either that or I think Suspiria is also high on that list. But
Suspiria is too art house for me to be just the Giallo, but I think Deep Red is like the first one that comes to mind for a lot of people. For me, it's a lot of like long names, because I think we haven't really covered a lot of long titles, which was also a trend at the Giallo height. They had like long convoluted titles.
Right.
Like with the Peeper Saw is a good one. And I don't know. There was just a lot. Even Dario Argento made a couple. But this one is just a classic one.
Yeah.
Classic poster, classic killer.
Yeah. And this one is definitely my favorite one that we watched. And one that I could like. Like, I could see myself watching this one more often.
It's more subdued.
Yeah,
in some senses, and then it's also gorier in other senses.
Oh, 100%. I think the killings themselves are a lot harsher.
Mm-hmm. The first killing, well, not the first actually like significant killing of the psychic, that one's rough.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I think that this is a lot harsher than any of the other Giallos that we've watched, because, you know, these ones make my full body cringe, you know?
There's also close-ups on some of the stabbings, which sometimes are avoided. But in here, they show you, like, a neck being cut off. That's the ending, I guess.
Yeah. And, you know, but the first kill, like, she gets pushed down onto broken glass, and that's kind of how the final blow of her dying, you know?
Yeah, she's getting macheted, and then...
with a butcher knife.
Yeah, and then he kind of slams her against the glass and cuts her neck arteries. Yeah, it's brutal.
It's super brutal, and, you know... And the movie starts off kind of with a killing, too, where you just see the knife go down in a shadow, screams, and then it cuts back to, like, their funky little music that's going on.
Yeah, the score for this by Goblin, it's an Italian rock band. This is the best score.
Impeccable.
It's one of the best scores of the 70s, and the 70s is known for good scores.
No, this one was really funky, and I loved it.
The music kept getting better, too. Like, you would play a song and then, you know, go to its suspense moment with no music and then start another one, and it's like, oh, this is even better than the previous song. Which is crazy because they're all so good.
Yeah, I agree. It was just a really... It's a fun movie, I would say, and I think that... it has really good shots in the beginning and then at the end where they're really captivating, I'd say, in their composition and setup. But then I feel like a lot of the middle part of the movie either drags on or just kind of feels like a movie.
I think it's the biggest flaw. It's the middle. It's the just investigation part. I think there's a lot of long scenes where the main character's just going through an empty house trying to find clues.
Yeah.
And that kind of does drag it a little, but the ending is so good it pays off.
No, this one does have a good payoff. And I feel satisfied by this one, unlike the other two that we watched, you know?
And the payoff kind of wraps up points that I wouldn't think it would, you know, when watching. There's points that get brought up where you're like, oh, okay, it's just for, you know, suspense or just for style, but then they get wrapped up and they're kind of in the back of your mind, like your brain is starting to forget that this happened, and then it comes back. I'm not going to spoil everything if you haven't watched it, but the ending is really good, and it really pays off, and the killer is so unique in the fact that you don't really know what the killer looks like from the front. You just know that they have a trench coat and they have black gloves, and you see it kind of from the POV of the black gloves, and it makes an iconic killer that you don't even know what the killer is. Like, there's no mask or anything like that.
Yeah, if there's, like, a mask or anything.
They just have a hat, a trench coat, and black gloves, and you just see the black gloves doing the killing.
Yeah.
So the black gloves are the killer, kind of, in your head.
Yeah, and all of these deaths are super, super brutal, in my opinion, where, like, I would not want to go... Like, none of their killings would be a way that I would want to go. Like, worst nightmare, worst case scenario type
The last two deaths. Gory. You see everything happening in those.
Yeah. And those are rough.
Yeah.
Well, I think they're all rough. Like, every single death that we saw, I was like...
But there's not that many. That's
holding
the thing.
my neck, yeah. Like, just because I was scared, like, you know.
I think, like, an hour into the movie, there's, like, one on-screen death.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's really milking the deaths. And I think that's what a lot of people like. It makes it less cheap and gory.
Yeah, I'd say that this is a lot less cheap than the other two, especially compared to Torso. It's not like the main focus on the movie isn't the killings. Even though the killings are iconic, you know,
they are.
They just aren't what's driving the creativity, I guess, of the movie.
To me, it's driven by the music.
Oh, the music is great.
Even in the scenes like that, this scene would be boring if it wasn't for the music.
Yeah, like when he's walking through the house, like it would
shipping
be,
at the wall.
Yeah, it would be even more boring because it does drag a little bit.
It does. But I can't lie.
It would be more boring if like the music wasn't as jazzy, you know, like snappy.
Yeah, this one is one of the higher. Argento in general, all of his movies are higher versions of what was cheap and popular at the time. Mm-hmm. He made them a little different, a little better.
Yeah. No, it was really good. I really enjoyed this one. And this one kind of is a lot of people's inspirations. Like this is kind of the if they're going to make a, you know, piece or a tribute to Giallos, then this is kind of where they're going to get their inspiration from. Like Edgar Wright said that this was a big inspiration for Last Night in Soho, and I can kind of see it because Last Night in Soho doesn't take the elements of a Giallo that's like the cheap and sleazy parts of it.
It does take the psychosexual and
sure, but it doesn't. But I think it takes the elements of the thriller aspect and the trying to figure out the killings and like who did it, you know, type thing.
With this one, I guess the spoiler, when you find out who did it, it's kind of like a magical moment of excitement because like, that makes so much sense, and it's such a good return for your investment because it is 2 hours and something.
Yeah.
So it's on the longer side for this type of movie, but it pays off. I love the killer. I love the actress that plays the killer. I think she's really good at playing a maniac.
And she has a nice look to her.
She looks like a maniac.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't even have to act. Like she could just stand there. And it also plays with the element that her son is involved in it somehow, but he doesn't kill.
Yeah.
He's just so disturbed from what he saw as a child.
Yeah, that it's kind of affected him. And he's just trying to protect his mother, you know? So I don't know, that kind of reminds me of like Psycho, you know? A little bit.
Yeah, it's the Psycho of the guy that wants to protect his mother, but his mother is alive in this game.
Yeah, and she is the killer, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like Friday the 13th, where the mother is actually the killer, and the son is just a messed up kid.
Just a messed up guy. No, but like there's a death in Halloween 2 that contains you know, a scene where it kind of takes influence from a kill in this movie. With the being drowned in scalding hot water. You know, that was brutal. Didn't like that one.
Not only being drowned, being burned at the same time. So it's like
it's a double whammy.
It's the two worst possible deaths: being burned alive and being drowned.
Yeah, literally, that would be a nightmare. And then also there is a scene where the professor that was the first murdered person, her friend, he is going to be killed, and as a distraction they send the little animatronic puppet
that was
thing.
So creepy though.
Yeah, it was really creepy.
It's creepy no matter how many times you watch it.
But you know, the movie Saw kind of took influence with that kind of puppet animatronic thing, and that's how they kind of came up with Billy the puppet.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious. As soon as you see it, it's kind of like you connected that dot.
Yeah, and it's just kind of interesting to see because like I wasn't really aware of the genre of Giallo before you kind of introduced me to it.
You're welcome.
And you know, I've seen a lot of these movies that take influence of it, but like Saw, we watched a lot of the Saw movies together, and it's just kind of interesting to see like what is being the influence of those types of movies, you know, like things that like I literally never would have, heard of had it not been for you. So good for you.
Yeah, but rating wise, I gave it an 8. I think that the pacing in the middle is it does slow it down a lot, and it could be shorter. And there is a shorter cut.
Yes.
But this is the good cut according to people. It's the 2 hour something cut, 2 hour 10-minute cut.
Yeah.
The European cut. So I mean, of course, I'm gonna watch the better cut, and it is a little longer, but it also kind of pays off in the end. So it doesn't. It's kind of a double-edged sword where I guess it's not double-edged because it's good on one of the sides.
Yeah.
But if you don't want the slow middle, then the payoff is not as good.
Yeah, because, I also gave this an 8. And again, same kind of reasoning. Like, I think it's good. The beginning and the end are what really make this movie. And just kind of the whole middle plot, it does drag. Yeah,
but that's what makes the end.
Yeah.
So it's
But, the US versions, a lot of those that got played at, the drive-ins and stuff, cut about 22 minutes of footage. So it does make it under 2 hours, but they kind of remove a lot of the most graphic scenes, apparently. Like, this is the first version I've seen, so I really don't know, exactly what, they cut. But they say that they remove some of the most graphic footage, and the romantic kind of subplot between the main character and the journalist. And then just kind of the subplot of, like, the significance of the house that holds the mural of the killing that took place.
And it holds the corpse of the father.
Yeah. So, I'd say some important elements, or like elements that make it interesting, do get cut out when you take 22 minutes of footage out. So, I mean, in terms of which one I would rather watch, I'd probably watch, the full European version, and just kind of suffer, I guess, with the...
It's not suffering, come on.
No, it's not. But it is, it does drag. Like, that's all we can really say about it. But it's good, and it was my favorite. I think it's just really, from the get-go, it kind of grabs your attention, and it has, a little bit of that supernatural element at the beginning.
Well, yeah, it's a tease. It's a tease, like, because you don't see the killer, and I think they're teasing that it could be supernatural.
Kind of, yeah.
So it's not. It's just a killing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's all the movies we're gonna talk about as a genre. There's a lot of cheap, not super popular ones that I really like. Mm-hmm. That. All the Colors of the Dark is not a cheap one, but it's a really good one. You should watch that one. Mm-hmm. You should watch Don't Torture a Duckling. I think that's like one of my favorite ones. It's one of the earliest ones I've seen too, like half a decade ago maybe.
Yeah.
What else do you have to add?
Oh, I was just going to add that there's even movies that we've covered on here that kind of took inspiration from giallos as a genre, such as Brian De Palma's Blowout. Mm-hmm. We covered that one a couple months ago, I guess, at this point. And that had a big giallo inspiration. And it's just, again, kind of interesting to see that, something that I thought was just kind of a pure thriller drama film has inspiration from some of these more sleazy Italian movies. And I don't know.
Those Italians and their sleaze.
It's just kind of interesting to see, that movies are just so worldly, like there's just so much, it's so much fun to just kind of see elements of other movies in movies that I enjoy, Yeah. It's just fun. And the more you watch, the more you kind of start to see different influences, even in influences that may not be super obvious to others or have been like blatantly stated, It's just fun. It's like finding Easter eggs.
And with Giallos, it's fun to look for weird titles. My favorite is Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, which is actually a pretty solid Giallo by Sergio Martino, which he did Torso. He loved his long titles, and he did a lot of exploitation, even outside of Giallos.
Yeah. There are some that are a little bit funny to, like, read. There's, like, a whole Wikipedia page that kind of goes over, like, with the whole... I wouldn't say the whole filmography of Giallos, but I think it probably has a good amount of Giallos on there in terms of film history. You know, so some of them are, like, very literal. So, like, you have the murder clinic or the murderer with the silk scarf.
I like the killer nun. It tells you who kills immediately in the title.
Yeah.
And it's also an okay movie.
Right. Yeah. No, they're fun.
There's the strange color of your body's tears. There's a lot of that type of title that kind of is poetic in a way.
Yeah. Or like the iguana with the tongue of fire. Like, that's kind of weird.
The bloodstained butterfly. There's a lot of... I'm just looking at the ones I've seen that have, like, kind of poetic murder titles.
Yeah.
It's a fun genre. It's, again, the titles and the reason the titles stand out, and it's the same reason there's a lot of gore in the movies. It's to sell.
Yeah.
And this is not, again, it's not eye art. It's just fun. It's just fun, and I watch them for fun, and I kind of collect the Blu-rays for fun.
Yeah, and I don't know if I will continue with this kind of Giallo intrigue or whatever. I think that they're not my favorite thing. Kind of like how Westerns aren't my favorite thing.
That's foreshadowing.
Yeah, for sure. It might be. We'll see. But, you know, I did have fun with some of them, and there are some elements that I did enjoy, but there's a lot of elements that I don't particularly care for. And I think
it's like every genre, though.
Yeah,
there's
sure.
romance movies that are good, and there's romance movies that suck. It's just, and they all have the same tropes.
Sure.
It's always a single lady trying to find love. So
right, but I would say that these tropes aren't my favorite tropes to, like, watch.
True.
And I feel like a lot of them don't have great payoffs for me.
That's true. I mean, I agree.
Because, like, my biggest critique of, like, Torso or
Blood and
Black Lace is the fact that, like, yeah, the killer gets got, but, like, there's no, like, authoritating body that can actually do anything.
Well,
for, you know,
boo-hoo. He's in the grave. It doesn't matter.
Like, it just kind of bothers me just a little bit that, like, you don't get that satisfaction of being like, justice will be served, you know, even though the killer's dead. Like, you just want that confirmation that justice will be, like, the story of the victims will be told correctly.
In all of the movies we covered, the killer did die, so
yeah. Which is nice.
I think that's what most people would agree is the payoff, is the killer dying and not going to jail for 7 years.
Yeah, I know, but it's just like one of those things that, like, it's kind of hard to explain, but I just kind of hope that, you know, when you have those moments where it just ends and, like, the killer's dead, but the victim survives, like, I always kind of wonder, like, well, are they gonna, like, are the police gonna spin this so that the victim, like, murdered this person? Like, not in self-defense, like, you know what I mean? It's just one of those things that just kind of bother me a little bit. So it's not, like, my favorite thing in the world, but you can kind of see how this, in terms of movie history, is kind of a precursor to a lot of the slashers and a lot of the just kind of horror films that we get today. And I think it's pretty cool.
And I think you're pretty cool if you like and subscribe this episode, or, you know, rate. Is that what you do in the podcast platforms?
Yeah.
Give us a 5-star rating. And yeah, we'll see you next week, or in 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. With a new episode. So stay tuned for that. And we'll see you later.